Hello, this is Lisa, your host of Unexplained America, and this week we're in Louisiana for really just the most spookiest of fun deep dives into the most haunted place in America since about the 80s, by the way. So, it's legit. Please find me on Facebook, Instagram, TikTok, YouTube. Follow, subscribe, comment. All of those things help. So, yeah. So, I hope you're having a good week. And I have a really busy pod month. And I do have an event next week, which by the time this comes out, my event will be in a couple days. It is in Fort Smith, and I'm covering Ronald Gene Simmons, The Christmas Killer, that I've already, recorded. So check that out if you have not listened. But yes, so busy pod week, lots going on, bonus material for the Patreon coming out at the end of the month. So yeah, and it's on Jack the Ripper. So stay tuned, guys. Stay tuned. So in 2007, I myself stayed at what's called the Myrtles Plantation Bed and Breakfast, and it's located in St. Francisville, Louisiana, around 20 miles or so from Baton Rouge. So, I had known about the Myrtles before 2007. So my husband, Daryl, he is from Baton Rouge. We kind of made that trip. We started dating in 2001. And so I became aware of it. And then I think I'd even watched, before we stayed, I definitely watched, the Ghost Hunters, I believe. It had come out before then. And I was just captured by Ghost Hunters. I watched all the Ghost Hunters. But anyway, so this was on my list. We had actually stopped just to look before we actually stayed there. So if that makes sense. But it was on my list. I was like, I have got to stay there. And it was just beautiful. Okay. So it was me and Daryl and my friend Sherry and her husband Lynn. And this was, again, just like a dream come true for me. It was kind of a pricey deal, especially for us at that time, newly married, new homeowners, blah, blah. It was it was kind of pricey. We'll talk about that, at least at that time and for us. So anyway, but it was and it's 7 hours from where we live. But anyway, it was still a big to do. So we went down there. I believe we stayed only one night, because then I think me and Daryl went on to visit, of course, his family down there. So, but anyway, it was just awesome. So we stayed there. I literally slept in our room with a mag light all night. And when I say slept, that's kind of not even accurate. I just laid there terrified, listening to every single sound in this 200-year-old house. Because at that time, this was before my iPhone. This was before all the Wi-Fi that people would have. There was they wanted to keep it very authentic. And this home is over 200 years old. And so there's no electronics. There's no TVs in the room at that time. I don't know if there is now, but yeah. So I'm listening to every single thing all night. And Daryl is just laughing at me. So, and we did have cell phones, people. We just didn't have an iPhone, So anyway, so let's start at the beginning of the Myrtles, which really begins way back in Pennsylvania, actually, with a man that would be called General David Bradford. Now, I'll call him David. David was born in 1762. That sounds so crazy. And he was born in Maryland, which was really, this is just real loose terms, but that's just a territory at that time. Again, 1762, we weren't even a country. So David was born, before the United States was born. So that's fun. And he did end up moving at some point to Pennsylvania. Evidently, some of his sisters had married prominent men in Pennsylvania, attorneys, politicians, that kind of thing. So he's kind of had connections and such. So he ended up landing in the western portion of Pennsylvania. And again, territory, not even a state, like almost to Ohio. This is like, yeah, as far from the eastern part of the colonies as possible at that point. So he's sitting there in western Pennsylvania. Now, the eastern portion of the state is kind of where stuff was going on. I mean, you had the Revolutionary War, and David was said to fight in the Revolutionary War. And I will say there is some confusion and mixing with him and a man named William Bradford Jr. So their histories, if you try to Google them or research them, sometimes they intermingle. And so some of William Bradford's information gets caught on David. Anyway, you gotta watch that. But we do know David is in Pennsylvania. He is working as an attorney. He is very successful. Like I said, he has connections in his family and such. He is very, there mixing it up with all the, successful people and landowners and that kind of thing. So he marries a woman named Elizabeth while they're in Pennsylvania, so that they have 5 children. And he becomes the deputy attorney general for his county, which is Washington County. So again, we know in 1774, we kind of went into the Revolutionary War, all this was going on. And so the Revolutionary War actually ended in 1783. And then it took some time for our founding fathers to kind of get everything together. And so, by 1789, George Washington is our first president, and he's in charge. And along with him is, a very famous now, Alexander Hamilton is the treasurer. So at this time, these founding fathers, these guys, they are building this new nation, this government, and they are actually operating out of Philadelphia. And so all the decisions for the colonies now are being made there. And many people, David Bradford, they didn't love all of the decisions being made. Imagine that. Can't make everybody happy, right? So he didn't love that there wasn't more say for people that weren't on the East Coast. He just wanted more, everything was so central at the time to Philadelphia, where things were just, happening. And so he didn't love that. People were kind of getting a little cranky about it. Can you imagine? So anyway, Hamilton was just trying to figure out a way for the United States to make money. This, of course, you gotta tax something. And so far they were just taxing, things that were coming from other countries. They were taxing that. Well, they needed more revenue. They needed some good source of revenue. After the war, they needed to regroup. And so what they decided to do, and this was going to be their first domestic tax, but they were going to place a tax, and they decided to put it into place in 1791, and it was called the excise tax on spirits, or excise on spirits tax, which really the largest spirit is liquor for someone really young. But anyway, so you had the largest liquor being made at that time was whiskey. So it was the most popular. It was what the people were distilling, or however you make it. And they were, so it became known kind of as the whiskey tax. And it was very much made, whiskey was being, kind of cultivated and made by farmers, especially farmers in Western Pennsylvania. So this was a big to-do. It was they were mad about, they're mad about everything, probably. They came off of this situation of Great Britain taxing them, and then now, they fought that whole war. They went through that, and now they kind of feel okay, well, now these guys are, our little kings and making decisions, and we just don't like it. So anyway, so they were mad. And so, again, this became an issue. It became what was called the Whiskey Rebellion, and Dave was involved. So, again, greatly affected the people around him, and he is involved, and he's just kind of, I mean, he's a free thinker. He's like all of the people at that time, kind of like they're gonna balk anything that they don't like. I mean, again, look what they just did. So they declined paying the tax, and when I say they declined paying the tax, they refused to pay it. They did not pay it. And he, Dave kind of was one of the key players. There were many key players in this revolt. So there were several, not just Dave, but they refused to pay it. And in fact, he became, I guess, known from this as Whiskey Dave, so to speak. But by 1794, President Washington, he was tired of these people revolting about the tax. He was tired of the tax collectors not collecting, not being able to collect because, they would just straight up be like, no, we're not paying you. They were doing all kinds of things like Dave and them were like stealing the U.S. mail. I mean, they were just being disruptive and going against the government. So all kinds of things. So President Washington forms a militia to go against these people to fight. They bring in like 10 to 15,000. He gets all these soldiers together from all the states to kind of fight in the Whiskey Rebellion. There was maybe like 5,000, which is quite a bit of people revolting against this. So it becomes a battle. It becomes a situation. So the federal government put a price in 1794 of $500. And again, he wasn't the only one, but on General Bradford's head. And again, I don't know if they called him general because he was like a deputy general attorney, because I didn't really see that he was a general whenever he was in war. I think he was like a major or whatever. But anyway, General Bradford was what he was known as, so to speak. So they put this on his head. They wanted him caught and arrested for his crimes against the United States. So it said that Bradford ran away. Now, there's two stories about how this all went down. So one story that is kind of, as you'll see, flagrant was that he, in the middle of the night, he hears, tales that he's going to be arrested. He jumps out of his 2-story home, which he did have a 2-story home, by the way. And by the way, he built this, it's a 2-story stone home. He built it in 1788 on Main Street in Washington, Pennsylvania. And this house is on the National Registry, and it is a historic landmark. It is currently a museum, so you can go visit that actually. And at that time, a stone home and a 2-story home would have been a mansion, by the way. So this was he had a really nice house. But anyway, story is he jumps out of his 2-story home, his 2-story mansion, and he lands. He doesn't just jump out the window, but he lands on his horse. Yes. And then he rides away from the soldiers that are after him, and they're like shooting, and it's just this whole big to do. And he makes it to the Ohio River, and then he gets on like a little, it says a skiff, like a little tiny boat, and he somehow it's just this big, huge tale of gunfights and all the other, and people helping him when he gets on this boat, and eventually he does make it down to New Orleans, and all these other people that are mad at the government help him. Now, the real quote-unquote story was that he did leave Pennsylvania. He knew. They put it in the newspaper. I did find an article that shows, they put out several names. There were like 20 names of men that the government were like, yes, $500, they're done. We're coming after them, basically. So he does leave Pennsylvania. It says that he actually leaves Pennsylvania kind of leisurely, just kind of takes his time. According to some tales, he didn't really want to leave, but then there were other people that were like, yeah, you need to go. Evidently, other men, wanted him gone. I don't know why, political reasons or whatever, but he didn't want to be arrested. So he did leave Pennsylvania, and he does make it to the Ohio River. and a boat captain named Keene helps him avoid some soldiers, officers that are after him. But it's not the big, he doesn't jump out the window onto the horse type of situation. So he does get help from Keene. So the Ohio River runs in and meets the Mississippi. So then they take the Mississippi down to what, we know, and what was called, it was called Louisiana. It was called, in fact, at that time it was called Louisiana. And it was like named after King Louis XIV. It was French. First, the French came in and took the land from the Native Americans that were already there. But in 1794, so Spain actually took over or purchased this land from the French. So actually it was either called Louisiana, it had a lot of French people there, or it was called New Spain, actually. So this area that he ended up landing is what we know as now as Louisiana, as St. Francisville. But that's where he landed. So he lands in this region and he purchases like 600 acres of land. So, and then he begins building a modest, it says, 8-room home on this land. And he calls it Laurel Grove. That's the name that he gives it. And while he's building, of course, allegedly he has left Elizabeth and the kids there in Pennsylvania. Now I will say, so this was 1794. There was a notice in the Pennsylvania papers in 1797 when Elizabeth put in a post that she was selling the house. Now, I will say some of those children, and we'll talk about this, they had more children. They were born during this time. So I don't know legitimately how long he was away from Elizabeth, because I don't think it was that long. I think he got here, he got the 600 acres, and he started building a house. Now, there were some structures on the land, and he kind of lived in the structures as he built. But yeah, so another kind of situation or tale arises that the land that he buys was Tunica tribe land, and not that that's alleged, but allegedly the tribe had that land and they used it as a burial ground on the actual site where he was like building or whatever. This is the alleged, because there's nothing to tie that together, but nothing legitimate, I should say. So evidently, according to lore, he comes in, finds out about this burial land, and then he digs up all of these graves and allegedly burns all of the remains, like burns them. And this creates a curse on the land. So now the land is cursed. And I will say, I did find an article that evidently miles away there was an actual a Tunica tribe burial site that was not located on this land. So I think this story kind of spins a little from some truth. You know how that goes. So anyway, so the land is cursed, basically. Now, in the meantime, like I said, Elizabeth and the kids are in Pennsylvania. She does list their home for sale in 1797, although I have a feeling she's already connected down in Louisiana, but maybe she's going back and forth. That would have been really hard to do in the 1700s of it all, so maybe the ages of the kids are blurred. Interesting. But anyway, so by 1799, George Washington is no longer the president, and the new president, John Adams, so he actually pardons Bradford along with everybody else. He pardons them and says, okay, you don't have to, you're no longer a fugitive or whatever. So now he's, by 1799, he is fully clear of the Whiskey Rebellion. And in fact, they were pleased with him, the government was, because they really wanted people settling this Spanish land. Okay. So that was something that they actually appreciated. And he was doing like surveying work. He was still, he mixed it up. So he was doing stuff while he was in Louisiana. He was getting involved and doing things and such and creating this land. And evidently he was involved in some surveying and in the area. So yeah. So they were appreciative of him. Now, house sales in Pennsylvania, Elizabeth and the children are fully joining him. They are fully now in the Louisiana territory. Again, territory. So now it's said that, they had 5 children evidently before 1794, but from what I could find, they had a total of 11. Now, not sure how many actually, made it to adulthood or whatever. That's speculative too, but 11 children are situated. So, and a lot of them came within the years of them settling, like in Louisiana, actually. So they do have one child, David Bradford. He is notated. It's really, like, again, the 1700s of it all. It's crazy. But you can actually find him and find a grave. And then he had a daughter, Sarah Matilda, and she was born in 1798. So you had David, 1796, Sarah Matilda, 1798, as you can see these dates. So clearly, again, Elizabeth wasn't in Pennsylvania, or he was visiting. Something was going on. So during this time, they're all living on this acreage. They're getting their house settled. They're doing their thing. Well, by 1808, at the age of 46, David Bradford passes away. And it's said that he is buried on the land, and evidently it was a family cemetery that has been lost. And I don't remember whenever I was there if there, seems like there were some graves out there. I don't remember exactly, but it literally said that his grave is lost. And a little side note. So Bradford, the Bradfords literally see Louisiana become a state by 1812. So he didn't see it. He dies in 1808, but his family. So right after he passes, Louisiana becomes a state. And then the area where the plantation is, so they call them parishes instead of counties, like we call them counties, but it's called West Feliciana, and it becomes a county in 1824. So just FYI. So this, they're seeing tons of changes. Now, Elizabeth, she's still living. They've got lots of kids. I mean, she's managing the farm, okay? She's managing the 600 acres in the plantation. And then in 1817, so Sarah Matilda gets married to a man named Clark Woodruff, who eventually is a judge. I guess he's an attorney, and then he is a judge, and basically he's listed as, like all of the others, planter, landowner, whatever, So Clark Woodruff is her husband, and it said that he and Elizabeth together, Sarah's mom, managed the farm, and they even expand the farm another 600 acres. So they had 600, and then they add 600. So they've got 1,200 acres. And they grow on this acreage cotton and indigo, which I had to look up what indigo was. I kind of thought I knew, which I was kind of right. But it is a plant, and it is a natural dye. And of course, it creates that indigo, the blue color. So it's a dye. And it was very popular. That was a very big deal. So yeah, so that's what they grow. Now, what the plantation grows. Now, Sarah and Clark, they have 3 children of their own. They have Cornelia, James, and Mary. Now, in 1824, Sarah becomes sick, and from all accounts, it said that she passes away from yellow fever. Although I don't think there's anything legit. It's not like that anybody has a death certificate or anything, but they believe that she died of yellow fever. And this will come up a lot more. But within the same time period, listed in the same year, like Cornelia and James also pass away from yellow fever. And this was a legitimate pandemic across the country. And 40,000 or so people kind of throughout this time period in the New Orleans area that they're in die of yellow fever. So this is very legitimate, very sad situation going on, kind of like we think of, tuberculosis and things. Yeah. So yellow fever, pandemic. So this leaves only Mary and then Clark, or Judge Woodruff. Yes. And a little side note, all of them will be buried and are currently buried in Hope Cemetery in New Orleans, just FYI. Now, this is the South before the Civil War. It is said that the Bradfords owned 37 slaves they had registered, and the Woodruffs had 32, at least by the 1830 census. This is an atrocity and a blight in history for sure, but this is what is actually notated. And then we'll talk about the Stirlings as well that are coming up. So Elizabeth Bradford, she passes away in 1831, and she is said to be buried there in St. Francisville. At that time, so Clark leaves St. Francisville. Him and Mary just moved. They go to New Orleans. They're like, I guess they're done. Too much death, too much, Elizabeth's gone. Yeah, they're just kind of done. And they leave. And Mary would have been 12 by this time, by the way. So they leave Laurel Grove and they sell the plantation to a man named Ruffin Gray Stirling. What a name. And Ruffin by the way, he already owned land, and he owned a lot of land. He owned some plantations already. He had a lot of money. He already had, slaves, in fact, of himself. So he had, I would say, even more, he owned a lot of property. Ugh. It's sickening to say that. But anyway, land and people, just by the way. Okay, so Ruffin was around 36 years old when he purchased Laurel Grove, and he was married to Mary Catherine, and they have numerous children. It said that they have 9. However, only 4 of those children make it to adulthood, which is horrible. Most of the children were actually born after purchasing Laurel Grove, and some, look back on that and be like, okay, well, it's a reflection of the house. Again, already there's kind of a stigma even to this land. They're saying it's cursed. So, or maybe it's just the 1800s of it all, and people, were just, they didn't always make it. So, now again, when Bradford first purchased the home, there was like a structure on the property, and he kept that structure even when he built his Laurel Grove home, his 8-room modest home. And this structure would have been close to the main house because back at that time, you put your kitchen outside of your house. So it was used as the kitchen, you had fires in it. That way, if something happened, it didn't take your whole house down, but that situation. So this is what, Ruffin purchases, and that's what's there. Now, Ruffin was very wealthy, had a lot of money. He was already a planter, farmer, tons of property owning going on, plenty of money. So he, had already amassed this great wealth from a family that had originally come from Scotland. That was kind of his heritage, but he had plenty of money. So he begins a vast renovation to the house. Really, I would say full-blown construction. And then he immediately renames the house. Instead of Laurel Grove, he's the one that changes the name to the Myrtles. And it was based on the beautiful crepe myrtles that surrounded the property. That's what was said. So he makes it amazing. So the house that he built, or actually that Bradford had built originally, was what you called a Creole cottage look. So this was and this is a type of architecture. So this was very popular in the late 1790s and into the early 1800s among the Gulf, down, where this is. Now, this was very different from the other plantation homes being built in the area, which all featured more of the Greek Revival look, which we all think of Gone with the Wind, with just the columns and the pediments. That's kind of what we think of as plantation. But this Creole cottage was really very French, obviously, but it mixed French and Spanish motifs, which is very of the area, but it was very French. So Ruffin basically, he took the original 8-room house and he pretty much added on a whole other house. Like, he pretty much doubled the size of what Bradford had built. And Bradford had like, I don't even know if the house that Bradford had built was like 2 full stories. I think it was like 1.5 stories, it said. So Ruffin also made it like a full blown 2 stories to where you have, square footage upstairs. So yeah, so he made it huge. That he made a whole new front entry. So he kind of moved. But he really stuck. I will say he stuck to the lines of the house. Like, he basically just extended the house to the south, it said, but he just made, I mean, he went from 8 rooms to 22 total rooms in the house. So, I mean, again, he more than doubled the house, and especially since he added, upstairs space as well. But yeah, so he made this thing amazing, and he kept it with the same idea of what Bradford did, just a lot bigger, a whole lot bigger. And this house is just fabulous. It has, 22 rooms, and it has a 120-foot veranda on it. I mean, it's just absolutely gorgeous, which we'll get more into the house later. So back to the Stirlings. So Ruffin and the family, they had some good times. Obviously, they're very involved in this property and making this property amazing. So yeah, and now they're there at the age of 59, and this is now 1854. Ruffin passes away due to tuberculosis, and in that same year, his son Louis also passes away. And they're not certain that it is tuberculosis, but they believe it was. Now, Mary, his wife, she's running the estate with the help of her children, her surviving children. And now, you know what's coming. In 1861, Louisiana seceded from the Union, and they joined the Confederacy. And by 1862, it said that the Union Army has come into the area. They are taking control of New Orleans. And during this time, the Myrtles is looted. Most of the family's belongings are taken. However, the actual structure survives, which is really surprising. And, not a lot of structures survived the war. So it is amazing. So by 1862, the end of the war is here. Mary now hires her son-in-law, his name is William Winter, to act as her attorney and manage the plantation. Now, William is married to her daughter, Sarah. Do you kind of see kind of a correlation here? Remember Clark Woodruff and Sarah? Yeah. So as compensation for doing all of this for her, Mary deeds the Myrtles to Sarah and William. However, the war devastated most Southern families, obviously, and all of their wealth had been tied up in Confederate money, and so now that Confederate money is worthless. And additionally, you have the freeing of their free labor that they had, so it looked like, I told you about, the slave ownership of the Bradfords and the Woodruffs. Well, the Ruffin family had probably double what they had. They just had a lot more land and a lot more slaves. Well, luckily, all of their slaves are now free, and this, again, atrocious part of that situation is gone. But it's, it devastates the family financially. So now the family, it is 1867, and they're just devastated. They're bankrupt, and they lose the Myrtles. Okay, so now they don't have it. However, within a couple of years, Sarah is able to purchase back the Myrtles, and her and William live there with their kids. And evidently, they have like 6 kids. There is one girl named Kate, and she died of typhoid fever at age 3, and she does die there at the Myrtles. There's a lot of, obviously, back then, I mean, people died at home, they died young. There's a lot of death, there's a lot of tragedy here, and just natural tragedy. But more is in store for this family. Like, Kate's death is not the only thing. coming. So on January 26th of 1871, and this is reported actually in newspapers, that William Winter was teaching Sunday school class in his gentleman's parlor in the home, which would have been on kind of the front of the house, and he hears someone approaching on horseback. The person calls out asking for an attorney, which he is. So William goes outside on the porch, to assist. And when he walks out onto the porch, it said that he is shot by a shotgun. And he took 5 pellets to his chest and 1 to his neck. And it said he died instantly. Like as he stood, it said that he did not utter a word. He fell dead. And this was reported, okay? Remember this. So the murderer fled and the killer was never identified. Now, I did find one article that mentioned they thought that it was an E.S. Weber who was the shooter. I never could find anything substantial about this person, but evidently this was mentioned in an article. This person never stood trial. There was never anything, no one took responsibility for William's death. So, devastation for this family, like an actual, and this would be the first and only recorded murder. Although, so many people through the years will say there were 10 murders, by the way. So Sarah never remarries, and evidently she was like 20 years younger than William, which is, we've kind of talked about this. That wasn't a lot back then. It seems wild now, but anyway. She was quite a bit younger than him, but she does remain at the Myrtles, and she lives there with, her mother's still living. So, her mother's with her. She's there. Other family, they all kind of, hang out back then. And it's a 22-room house. They've got plenty of room. So in 1878, Sarah dies actually at the age of 44. And then in 1880, Mary dies. So in the wake of them passing, like some of the heirs, it already said when William died, like some people got some land. But anyway, the home went on to a Stephen Stirling. So a Stephen Stirling now owns the Myrtles. However, allegedly, Stephen is into gambling and has a gambling problem and a money problem. By 1886, he has to sell the plantation. So within 6 years of him gaining ownership. So he sells to a man named Orrin Brooks, who was just a local businessman. But Orrin didn't own the house very long. He actually sells the house by 1889. Now, it does change hands a few more times until it's sold to a person named Harrison Milton Williams in 1891. Now, Harrison was a school teacher turned planter, and he is married. His wife is Fanny. They have a lot of children. In the 1900 census, they literally have like 8 people living in the Myrtles between him, Fanny, the children, and then he has a sister-in-law there. So big families, all of these families hanging out. So now the Williams own the property. Now, Harrison, he passes away of stomach troubles. Doesn't say what. It came on pretty quickly, though. This was documented in the newspapers. But he dies of stomach issues in the house. So he dies in the home. And he is 64 years old. And this is 1909. So now we're in 1909. Now, Fanny takes care of the property. She's still, again, a billion kids going on. You got all the kids. And in 1935, so she lives a lot longer than he does. But Fanny passed away in 1935 at the age of 69. So she was also, as you can see, quite a bit younger than him. And of course, it says that she dies also at the plantation and that she had become sick and was having seizures. So you have a lot of death in the home. Now, I will say, per her obituary, I will say she was mentioned about how much she loved her home, how she loved making it beautiful, she loved to plant, and that she had left 6 children. Now, only one named Eddie actually lived in St. Francisville. It looked like their children were scattered, like somewhere in Spain, somewhere in Canada, like they had all moved off. Now, it said upon Harrison's death that some of the land surrounding the Myrtles was divided out to heirs. I have a feeling, I think she was his second wife, and so he had grown kids and family. So some of that land was divided out. Okay, just remember that. So land's being divided. And there was evidently, I mean, obviously there was 600 original acres with the house. So anyway, lots of land going on, lots of division, lots of heirs. So after Fanny passed, it said that the Myrtles stayed in the Williams family, but by June 19th of 1948, several of Fanny's daughters actually get together and sue one of her sons. And they require the house in 10 acres. So this is all that's left by 1948 with the house is 10 acres. So everything else has been surveyed, parceled off, other people have, or just at least sectioned off from the house. Okay. That's crazy. So this is what is left. And this is what is left to this day, by the way. So it's like the property is 10 acres. So this property, because of this lawsuit going on with Fanny's daughters, this fight, the house has to be sold to the highest bidder. And so obviously the kids have not been able to agree what to do with the house. The courts have gotten involved, and it said that the sisters and then there's two brothers. Only one brother is actually sued because I guess he was difficult, but there's 6 kids and they're going to split the proceeds 6 ways, but it's got to be, they're just auctioning, and it's just so sad that it came to that, but it's all literally in print. So it's unclear who purchased the home in 1948, but by 1953, a woman named Marjorie Munson, she purchased the house. She is a widow. She had lost her husband, Frank, and I believe she was from Oklahoma, or maybe California. But anyway, she purchases the Myrtles for $40,000, which is the equivalent, and this is 1953, of $1.4 million today, just by the way. And it said that she refurbishes and renovates the home, bringing it back to its stunning potential. So by 1955, Marjorie is remarried to a man named Dolar Joseph Michaud. I guess he's French, perhaps. And she is now Marjorie Michaud. They hold the house open for everything. They are social butterflies. They have concerts and all kinds of things. So Marjorie, and they're very musically inclined. So Marjorie and Dolar, they actually write a song about the house, like the legends of the house. So obviously, I mean, this is in the 50s and there's already legends. So keep that in mind too. So the song is called Peer Through a Silver Keyhole. Yeah. And again, based on the house legends. So other than concerts, Marjorie also holds DAR meetings, the Daughters of the American Revolution. Doesn't that remind anybody of, something? The Gilmore Girls? Anyway, love the Gilmore Girls. But in fact, so Marjorie, not only are they having DAR meetings, they're having concerts. Well, during this period, I would say by it's like 1955, 1956, they open the house up for tours, and they open a gift shop. So the house is advertised literally in the newspaper that it's open to public tours for $1 per person for adults. And it appears to be open every day of the week and even some afternoons on Sunday. So Marjorie is the first owner of the Myrtles to open the home up to the public. Yes, in the 50s. So Marjorie lives and loves the Myrtles. I mean, she loves it and into the 1970s. But by 1975, 2 investors now purchased the Myrtles. Marjorie, she was older. Her and her husband, they do pass away, and they're buried in California, by the way. So, and she lives to be like, I want to say 92 or something like that. So she lives a long life. But in the 70s, she relinquishes the Myrtles. So the investors are an Arlen Deese and a Robert Ward, and they purchase, and he goes by Bob, they purchase the Myrtles, and they spend a whole year renovating the plantation and evidently bringing it back to its quote unquote golden period, which they felt was in the 1850s. So they felt like the 1850s of it all, which would have been the time period that Ruffin had renovated the Myrtles, by the way. So the house, and I will say the house is, I mean, I don't know what the 1700s are like much, but the house feels very 1800s. I will say that. And a lot of the furnishings, even when I was there in 2007, were more 1800s or whatever. But some of the antiques go way back, and we'll kind of talk about that. But by February of 1976, the house is newly open to the public, and there is an actual curator running the house. Like, I think his name was Stewart, and so they just own it. They don't live there or anything. It's just like a business situation. And now the cost of the tours are $250 a person. And this is again 1976, so they introduce a nightly tour. So they're going to do a night tour. And in advertisements, they mentioned, when people come to view the house, they do mention about viewing the grand garden of the senses on the property. And I will say, the property is amazing. Like, it's just amazing. But they say that on the property, there are 5 statues throughout the gardens that relay the sense of smell or sight, sound, smell, touch, and taste. And I will say, these statues are still there. They're just amazing. It's beautiful. Like, the ground is beautiful. So in the early 1980s, very early, James and Frances Kermeen, they purchased the Myrtles. And there are it changes hands after, I will say, I don't have every single owner down pat, but James and Frances Kermeen, they purchased the Myrtles during this time, and they opened the home up to not only tours, but they're the first to make it a bed and breakfast, which it is still, and even more. So during this time, the house is publicized as the most haunted house in the U.S. by psychics, deemed by psychics specifically, and this is in print, in the newspapers. The house is featured nationally in the Wall Street Journal, the Time magazine, and additionally a man named Richard Weiner, he includes the Myrtles in a book he writes called House of Horrors, and it's just a book filled with many different homes that are haunted and talks about them. This is early 80s, by the way. Okay? Early 80s. So this is the kind of first, maybe not first mention, but this is when the house is really becoming nationally known. And I'm thinking, oh my goodness. So by the time Ghost Hunters was going out in 2007 or early 2000s, like, it had been quote unquote haunted and for, 20 years. So it's crazy. So crazy. But anyway, so this is early 80s. Now, in an article in 1985, Frances Kermeen, so she mentions there are ghost sightings every single night at the Myrtles. There are little ghost children and a ghost bride that dances in the parlor. And one of the mirrors in the home will reflect a ghost man wearing a top hat. And people will see ghost figures in the large oak trees on the lawn around midnight. She also mentions, and a lot of these articles, especially in the 80s, they mention how there were 10 murders at least in the house. And they do mention one situation where a woman and 2 children are killed by poisoning of a birthday cake, which we will circle back to this story in a minute. So that is mentioned in the 80s in print. Now, Frances herself, she ends up writing a novel about the Myrtles. It's called The Myrtles Plantation. And I'm going to, I didn't read the novel, but I will cite everything so you can, deep dive. There's lots of interesting things on it. But anyway, so I will post. But she mentions in her book, this is just a little snippet, how a young friend that she knew from California comes out to work at the Myrtles and help her. And evidently, the young friend tells Frances that she is having intercourse with a ghost in the house. Yes. So Frances doesn't dismiss the girl or her, what she's saying, but she also notates in the book that this same girl ends up having relations with Frances's husband, James. So this was evidently the most salacious and colorful story I heard about the Myrtles, actually. Yeah, so this is the 80s of it all, I guess. So by 1992, we've got new owners, and they still own it. So John and Tita Moss, they purchased the Myrtles. And again, like I said, they still own it. Their family, it's a family-run business, so the Moss family still owns it. So during their time, this is when the famous picture of a ghost named Chloe comes about. So it's said that, Tita was taking pictures of the plantation for the insurance company. Like they will ask you to take pictures. So she's taking pictures. And again, this is 1992. This is before iPhones or whatever. You actually have to develop film, send it off, blah, blah. So she sends the pictures to the insurance company, and they ask her to send another picture, but this time without anyone standing in the picture. And she's very confused because when she took the picture, she's like, no one was there. I don't understand. And it doesn't really relay, okay, did she just send them proofs? Did she just send them like a disposable camera? And I don't know. But she doesn't know what they're talking about. And in the picture, so when she gets it back, I guess when she's looking at it, which you can see this picture online, they will talk about it at the Myrtles, but there is a figure standing kind of in between the back of the main house, the back of the main, Myrtles building, and where it meets the kitchen. The kitchen's kind of off, doesn't tee it, but maybe, I don't know, kind of tees it. So there's like a space, like an alley between the two buildings, and you can just see this figure, okay? And it looks like a young African-American woman, like wearing a turban. That's what, but the weird part, I will say the weird part is you can kind of like see through it. It's like you can see through the figure and see the siding of the house. So it's very intriguing. It's just very intriguing. So Chloe, or in some stories, this young woman was named Cleo. So Chloe was said to be a slave working inside the home during the time of Judge Clark Woodruff. So remember, he is the son-in-law to General David Bradford, and Woodruff was married to Sarah. And remember, she died of yellow fever and such with the kids. So the story goes that Chloe and Judge Woodruff were having an affair, and then Chloe additionally enjoyed eavesdropping on the family, conversations in parlors, in certain parlors, and she would like listen through the keyhole. So it sounds familiar about that song too, right? So one instance, the judge catches Chloe listening as he and other gentlemen were in their gentleman's parlor. And so with others present, he had no choice but to punish her. And normally this punishment for slaves at the time would have been like hanging them. But she's his mistress. He didn't want to do that. So allegedly he has one of her ears cut off. And then having her ear cut off, she would wear a green turban around her head to cover this, disfiguration. Well, Chloe, having been punished, was also demoted to work in the kitchen, per Sarah. Some stories say Chloe was either wanting revenge on the family, or other stories say Chloe just wanted to kind of like get back in the good graces of Sarah, get back to the house. And so she decides to put oleander leaves into a birthday cake being made for one of the children. So allegedly just trying to make them a little bit sick, so then they would need her to come and help them. Well, evidently, and oleander is very poisonous, and evidently she used too much, and then it said that she, poison killed Sarah and then the two children. And then it was said that other slaves found out about it, knew about it. They didn't want to get in trouble. And so they decided to go ahead and hang Chloe and then hang her from one of the oak trees. And then they threw her body into the river weighted down. This is horrible. So now her spirit haunts the plantation, but also the spirits of, Sarah and the children haunt the plantation. And again, all kind of intermingling. Now, when I visited the Myrtles, this is the story I was told each and every time. It was very, this is their story. This is their picture of Chloe. And again, I went several times even before 2007. And then, of course, in 2007. And then I have actually gone back. So we've actually taken Elle back. It's been a long time ago. I mean, she's 17 now. I mean, she's probably 12. It's been a while. So since she's actually been, but we have gone back for tours, taken Elle. And again, the story remains the same about Chloe. Now, Sarah and James and Cornelia, they all, by decree, they all died in 1824. But again, some say it was yellow fever, and then some believe it was, the Chloe. And there's nothing concrete to relay if Chloe existed or didn't exist. There's no way to know. And of course, there's no death certificates on any of this. And I couldn't find anything, obviously anything legitimate about the deaths of, Sarah, James, and Cornelia to outline things. But I did find as early as 1971 the story of Chloe. Now, she's not named by name, but the story all references the same. She's not given a name. So, interesting. But by the 80s, she actually has a name of Chloe. I will say that in print that I found. But so this whole kind of haunted history shows up as early in print as 1971, by the way. I'm sure, obviously, talk was, verbal, communications about it all went on longer. But it's just interesting. It would just be awesome to know, like, how early did people think the place was quote unquote haunted. But anyway, so whether or not you believe the story behind Chloe, there is definitely a figure, a documentation of a figure in that photograph. And additionally, I will say through the years, people have taken, and I'll try to post like everything that I can find, and I've got more coming, but more to tell you, but tons of pictures, tons of people taking pictures and seeing photographs. And in fact, so I told you about, William Winter, and it is said he died right away. Well, there's also an additional story that says that he did make it back into the house. He stumbles up the main stairwell, because a lot of people do find figures in, like, when they take pictures of the house and the main stairs, and there's two different stairs. You kind of have like a back staircase that gets you to like the rooms we'll talk about, and then where I stayed, and then you've got a main staircase like right at the entrance. Well, people do capture images, interesting enough. So, and then they say that it's this William Winter. Who knows about that? There's a figure, but it is said that he died. It's point blank. He died right away on just outside. So the stories told by visitors and guests, like I said, they're numerous. They're like Francis Kermeen mentioning the little ghost children. So people tell about, a bride ghost. They'll see a lady in a wedding dress or in white, in the parlor. There's mention of handprints in the mirrors, but also figures in the mirrors. So there's a lot of activity people find in the mirrors. And the mirrors are said to be very old. Now, again, not original to the Myrtles. Remember, the Civil War happened. So, but all of these antiques brought in, they're bringing in, at one point, they brought in like 500-year-old, imported antiques from, so, and you'll be able to see, like, if you go to the Myrtles or have been, everything is old. It's definitely antique and just fabulous. But anyway, So tons of people have experiences of the figures, the mirrors. There's pictures and such. Now, some people hear children or they hear footsteps in the house. And then some feel little tugs at their clothes or like taps on their shoulders. Like there's been a lot of stories about that. So the house itself, again, it's absolutely beautiful. It's like a white clapboard siding, the huge veranda on the front with the iron wrought, the ironwork, and it's painted like a mint greenish blue color. So you've got like the white, white house and the blue like ironwork lattice. And then you've got like the front porch has always been roped off every single time I've gone. I don't know if they've had issues or they don't want people like walking. I know whenever the Stirlings added to it, they had to like reinforce. One of them had to one of the people that have renovated over the years have had to reinforce the foundation. There was a huge issue with the house and the foundation, and at one point, like it was all like kind of coming apart. So I don't know if that's the issue, but the front porch you cannot walk on. I didn't even do that. You know how I do with signs, but no, you can't walk on the front porch. Now, in the back of the house, there's an expansive porch back there with rocking chairs and a lot of, situations. Like in the main house, there's this amazing plaster mold working. I mean, intricate details, just amazing. Like everything is just beautiful. The original wood floors, and they're like this marbleized cypress, and they're lovely. And the house is decorated, like I said, in period pieces of furniture, going back many years, 100 years minimum. There are chandeliers everywhere, and it's said that almost all of the windows in the home are original. There are marble mantles, and again, just all of the trim work and woodwork, and they've kept it very, very nice, and they've kept it up throughout the years. All the owners have really, done their part to bring it back to its glory, so to speak. So they say. So when I stayed there, I do want to say, so there were four rooms you could book upstairs via the back stairwell. And I stayed in one of those rooms. And then there was like one room downstairs called the General David Bradford Suite. I really wanted to stay there, but we didn't. Now, upstairs, you have the Judge Clark Woodruff Suite. You have the John Leake room, the William Winter room. And then you actually have more than just 4 rooms. You have the Ruffin Stirling and the Fannie Williams. So I think I stayed in the William Winter room is what I remember. Now, these are the only rooms in the actual main house. Now, at the time I went, there were maybe 3 other like they were like rooms, but they were outside the property. They were kind of, they were detached and they were just kind of built on. So you kind of have like a gift shop, the kitchen area, the gift shop area off the house. And then you had these other rooms. Then you had a caretaker's like cottage. And it was clear that this person, the caretaker, like lived there full time. They had like back then they had like the dish, the actual dish for TV or internet or whatever. So there are now, like they have built, the Moss family have really expanded, and now there is like a full-blown restaurant on the property, and there's even more cottages. So there is a total of 21 different quote-unquote rooms that you can book. And, you still have the same amount of rooms on the main house, but now you have like several cottages, and one's even like a house. And I will say the property is beautiful. They do a lot of weddings there, by the way. So you can have your wedding there. So I remember in 2007, again, it was pricey for us at the time. It was between $200 and $300, which looks to be about the same price it is now, which is very interesting. And I have covered the Haunted Crescent Hotel. Go back and listen to those episodes. The Crescent Hotel is in Eureka Springs, and it is amazing. And in fact, I'm going next week. after my event in Fort Smith, me and Daryl were going for a couple days, just a late anniversary thing. And I love the Crescent. But anyway, I mean, those rooms are more like $400. So the Crescent is more expensive than the Myrtles, which is interesting to me. But anyway, I will say, and the Myrtles looks fabulous. I want to go back. But so depending on when you go and, which room you stay in, because it's going to vary on which room you get. So that's kind of the price. But you can go on their website and look as far as the Myrtles accommodations. So now I was a big addict of Ghost Hunters, which I mentioned. I mean, we're talking Jason and Grant, the OGs. So they went to the Myrtles. And I remember watching that. And I'm just like, oh, because I watched them all. But during their investigation, they even had experiences, which, of course, they're all about debunking stuff. I mean, they want to disprove. Well, they end up capturing a ghostly figure moving across the camera in the back of the house. They capture items moving around on their own in one of the guest cottages. They have some EVP, some electronic voice phenomenon going on. And then they witness what they believe to be a human torso passing in front of them on what they called a slave path, like in the yard on the grounds. So they had 4 different experiences, just the Ghost Hunters, which is amazing. So I myself did not have any haunted experience in 2007, sadly. But my friend Sherry, who was across the hall from us, she kind of did, not necessarily like in her room or anything, but she had a situation where, she was up like me in the night. Well, there was another room upstairs with us, which was called the doll room, and it was empty that night. I don't know which room that is, but it was empty, and she kept hearing the phone ringing, like in that room. And finally, she gets up and she goes and knocks on the door, and it stopped. And then she also, so she was taking lots of pictures on her trip. So on that visit, and of course she has to develop these pictures. It's not automatic. It's not the iPhone situation we have now. So when she gets it developed, like she had taken this picture of the back of the house of the porch at night, and there's like this large orb. I have the picture and I will be posting, but there's a large orb, but then there's also, like in one of the rocking chairs, it looks like a skeleton person is sitting in the chair. It's so creepy and it's so cool. I will post this. So she actually went back to the Myrtles in 21, and she was on one of the tours, and the tour guide, they were in like one of the bedrooms during the tour, and the tour guide mentioned how ghost children will have like handprints show up on bedspreads. And literally, I guess as they were in this room, she caught a picture, so she sent this to me, of the actual indentation that came up while they were, on this ghost tour, while this, the tour guide was talking about this phenomenon. It happened. So crazy. So then she has a weird picture of just a figure in the mirror, and she was like, it didn't look like there were people with them on this tour and in the mirror, but she said it didn't look like anyone in like any one of the people on the tour. So it's just amazing to me, like all the many incidences throughout the years. I mean, it's just, yeah, that's a lot. That's a lot of documented items. So yeah. And I would say, it wins. It wins the title of the most haunted house. Like it's been called that from the 80s. And in fact, St. Francisville, there are other old homes in this area that you can, look at. And St. Francisville is known to have be the city that has the most recorded documented hauntings. Interesting. So, I mean, when I think of haunted, I mean, Louisiana's old. I don't know. It's an old territory. So, haunted. Very cool. So, however, even if you don't care about ghosts or believe in such, long story short, the Myrtles is just beautiful. It's beautiful. It's charming. It's over 200 years old. It has the oak trees and the Spanish moss, and it's just the statues. And I will say, when we went, we walked all around the property, and it's right there on the highway. It's right. I think the highway is 61, so it's right. It's easy to come by, but there was like a long, like swimming pool, how they used to make those concrete swimming pool. At some point, someone put in a concrete swimming pool, and it was like long and narrow, and that was there in 2007. I don't know if it's still there. I didn't look for it when we went back with Elle. I'm gonna have to go. So I know I want to go back. If you've never been, you should go check it out. And maybe we will see some ghost children or a ghost bride and maybe a man on the stairs. I don't know. I don't know what we'll find at the Myrtles, but it's definitely cool. So check it out. So thank you for listening to this haunted history of the Myrtles. And yeah, let me know what you think. Leave me a comment. Love ya. Bye.